Okay, we're just past 5:30. We have a couple hours with you all this evening. Thank you so much for making it out tonight. I see many familiar faces. It's been a couple months since we last met. So we're here tonight to give you an update on the project. And before we begin, I'm going to turn it over to Angela Robinson-Pignon. She's going to give a few opening remarks.
So thank you so much for making it out this evening to discuss the vegetation management plan. As Rebecca already mentioned, I'm Angela Robinson-Pignon with the Oakland Fire Department. I'm here with Rebecca Nicholas of Nicholas Communications, Ken Schwartz of Horizon Water and Environment, who is the lead consultant on this project. I'm here with Scott Eckhart from Dudek Consulting. Maria Sabatini is the Assistant Fire Marshal who just joined us. Eric Logan is the Interim Deputy Fire Chief at Field Operations Bureau. And so we're all here to answer any questions that you have about this project or if any inquiries you may have into vegetation management in the city in general. Hopefully you'll find this presentation and the Q&A session informative. And as you know, we're going to take the public comments into consideration as we move forward in developing a draft document. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Rebecca.
All right. So I'm going to turn it over to Ken Schwartz, our principal in charge for this project. And he's going to give you a little bit of an overview about tonight's meeting and some of the goals that we have for this plan.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Well, good. And just like Rebecca said, and Angela, thank you for coming out tonight. It's very encouraging to see the level of interest in the project. It helps make the project a better project when we have community participation and input. So thank you again for coming out. And if you have questions along the way, don't hesitate to ask. But we'll also have a lot of dedicated time for questions and discussion. And for folks who have been submitting comments along the way, thank you. We do receive those. We read them. They have influence. They have impact. So tonight, really the purpose of tonight is kind of like an interim check-in with you all in the community. We met here in this room and also we had two briefings back at the end of March. I think it was March 29th and 30th, just at the end. And that was really kind of getting started, and we kind of opened it up and provided an overview of what we were hoping to do in this process and described the plan area, kind of the overall purpose of the plan, the steps involved. And we said we were going to be checking in with folks, with you, along the way. And so this is one of those check-in times. And we've made some progress and wanted to share that with you. So tonight what we're going to do is walk through some of these points you see here on the screen in the bullet. The first one, I'm going to turn over to Rebecca, and she's going to talk about the community survey and the results. So we had lots of participation in the community survey, and we learned a lot of things about what people are looking for in this process. And so she'll kind of review that with you, and you'll get a sense of that. And that's important because it's important to see, well, how are people seeing this problem or this issue? What might be the solutions? From there, we'll then talk about, well, what have we been doing in developing this draft plan? And so we're going to share with you the outline of the plan. That took a while to kind of figure out how should this be structured in a good way. The methods and the methodology, we kind of introduced that maybe a little bit last time, but we hadn't really gotten into it. Now we're into it, and we can share with you kind of that methodology. It's important. And then the biological resource mapping. So this was, I think I described it a couple months ago, as the baseline mapping. We were going to go out there and map the habitats and vegetation, what currently exists out there. And that becomes really the baseline for understanding what is it that we need to do or want to do. Okay? So we'll be sharing some of that with you. And then also then talking about something we're only now really starting to get into, which is once you understand what's out there and what's on site, what do you do about it? And we want to share with you kind of some ideas and how we're thinking about that. Okay, so that's what tonight's mostly about. And of course, then we'll have opportunities for questions and feedback. So with that, maybe just to start is refreshing our memory a little bit about the objectives and the goals, really the goals of the plan, the overarching goals. What are we trying to achieve here? And we showed some of these at the March briefings, and we refined them a little bit since then, based on some input, based on some thinking about the plan. But they're pretty consistent. First one here is reduce fire hazard on city-owned land and along critical access egress routes within the city's designated very high fire hazard severity zone. So maybe the part to focus on there is that this really is focused on city-owned parcels and properties. That's what the plan is covering. And also along, again, access and egress routes. That's a very important aspect of the plan. Second bullet point here is to reduce the likelihood of ignitions and extreme fire behavior to enhance public and firefighter safety. So again, balancing that and recognizing that ignitions are a key part of any fire risk here. It's a lot of things go into it. Fuel load, but also the ignition process itself, but also wanting to the extent possible, reduce the risk for an extreme fire. Third bullet here, implement practices to avoid or minimize impacts to natural resources. This plan and our approach, while it has this focus on fire hazard reduction, it can't do it to the extent that we're then impacting natural resources to such a degree that, that we're creating additional impacts beyond that. It needs to balance these things. We need to look at that very carefully. That's important. So that's kind of an equally weighted goal here. And then also for the community here in the city of Oakland to maintain an active role in regional efforts to reduce fire hazard in the Oakland Hills. While the plan is focused on the city parcels, you go just a little bit off a city parcel and you're then into someone else's land. And so this needs to be coordinated and thought through, whether that's with stakeholders like East Bay Regional Parks, who we thank for offering to use the facility tonight, or private landowners or other landowners in the area. So again, that's kind of the overarching goals of the plan. And from there, I'm going to now turn it over to Rebecca to talk about the community survey.
All right, so before I get into that, I just want to point out that we do have a citizen here tonight who's videotaping and has the intention of putting this meeting on YouTube. So if you have any questions or concerns, he's this gentleman in the blue shirt over here, if you just want to.
It's meant to be shared to whoever wants.
Yeah, yep. So if you want a copy, feel free to just approach him separately. Okay, so I just want to acknowledge, first of all, that we had, I think, a wonderful turnout on our community survey that we submitted back in March and April. We gave folks 4 weeks to respond. We had 316 total survey responses, and of that, 310 were unique responses, meaning some people submitted a couple of surveys, and of the 316, 310 were unique. Since we all last met, we've got 332 people who have signed up to receive our email alerts, and that's growing by the day. I get 2 or 3 a day at least of people who are interested in this project. And we've gotten 1,750 website visits. So folks are paying attention in this region and are interested in this project, clearly. So I'm just going to go over some of the survey responses that we received, and we'll put this up online afterwards. I know that some of you had requested the raw data results from this, and so what I did is I tried to take the data and make it into a little bit more comprehensible graphics for you. So first of all, we learned that 90% of the survey respondents own their home, and of those who responded, we learned that 42% live in Oakland and 13% live in Berkeley. This was important to us because it indicates that the folks who are following this project are primarily the ones that are going to be impacted by this plan and who live in the region. We also learned that since living in their home, 30% of respondents have noticed a change in the accumulation of weeds, brush, trees, and other fire fuel. 16% noticed a change in fire risk to the homes in their community. And 54% of respondents reported no noticeable change in fire risk since living in their home. When asked about how often a fire causes worry for our respondents, 38% of you said that you worry about fire sometimes, 31% of you worry about fire often, 14% never worry about fire, 7% worry about fire constantly, and then 10% of our respondents didn't answer. And so here's why most of our respondents worry about fire. When asked about the closest a fire has come to their home since living in it, 63% of respondents experienced fire threat since living in their home. Of that 63%, 8% said that the fire has come on their property, 4% reported fire up to their property line. 22% said that fire has come within 1 mile of their home. 16% said that fire has come between 1 and 5 miles of their home. And you can see here that 20% of the respondents felt there was no fire threat and 16% were unsure. So then we asked you guys what you thought the goals of the vegetation management plan should be. And most respondents, 71%, felt that the plan should be to reduce fire hazard on city-owned property and along critical access routes. 70% felt that vegetation should be managed to reduce ignitions and fire behavior and also to enhance firefighter safety and public safety. 66% felt that a plan goal should be to avoid and minimize impacts to natural resources. 64% of the respondents want the city to maintain an active role in reducing fire hazards. And then 21% of you actually selected other, and then we gave you all the option to provide some more input on what that might look like. And we received a wide range of responses. I'm just gonna give you a few of them here. Folks wanted to see a dedicated source of funding for wildfire prevention, providing incentives to property owners. A lot of people wanted to improve fire department training, equipment, and response times. A lot of folks cited limited parking on high fire risk days and the associated impacts of sort of that crowded parking in a narrow roadways. Planting more trees was cited as an option. And then there was a number of responses that were directly opposed to the idea of vegetation management as a practice and therefore to the development of a vegetation management plan. So next we asked folks what their preferred vegetation management techniques would be. 90% of respondents preferred targeted grazing by goats. 80% of you preferred manual vegetation management practices such as hand labor, trimming, and the use of hand tools. 59% preferred mechanical methods such as mowing, chipping, or using heavy equipment. 17% preferred the use of herbicides. And 13% of the respondents provide other vegetation management techniques such as the use of volunteers for manual labor, aggressive outreach and education was cited, planting fire-resistant native plants. And again, of this 13%, a number of respondents really made vocal opposition to harming trees and plants and the use of herbicides of any kind. So then we asked you guys what you think reduces fire risk in your community. 52% of you cited weed reduction, limb maintenance, brush management, and removal of dead trees. 25% of the respondents cited creating a defensible space around homes, and that includes vacant properties. 23% cited removing or thinning French and Scotch broom, eucalyptus, and Monterey pines. Oh, wait, there we go. Sorry, guys. Let's see. 20% cited the need for increased fire patrols and inspections, better training and resources for the fire department, and improved fire department response times. And then 19% cited public awareness and education as a method of reducing fire risk. And finally, when we asked you guys about your environmental concerns associated with vegetation management, 38% of you expressed concern with and opposition to the use of herbicides and pesticides. 24% expressed concern with and opposition to tree removal or clear cutting. 18% expressed concern over the environmental and safety impacts of another fire and opposition to no action. 13% expressed concern with removing non-native species and restoring native habitats. 12% expressed the need for safe, eco-friendly wildfire management practices. And 10% expressed concern with careful management to ensure that the vegetation that needs to be managed is the only one that's impacted, and basically concerned with associated impacts to plants and habitats as a result. So this is just a really high-level summary of all of the responses we got. We did read every single response, and I do have to thank you again for your participation because it really has gone into the planning, the initial stages of planning for this vegetation management plan. And so to give an update of what that planning process is looking like now, I'm going to turn it back over to Ken and Scott.
You gonna put this presentation online?
We will.
Okay. Oop, wrong way. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about the approach here in developing the plan. But first, just take a minute here and look at the setting. We reviewed some of this before, but this is it, showing the maps here of the parcels that are under focus for the plan. We reviewed this last time, but it stretches basically along the hills here, kind of northwest to southeast, from Claremont Canyon, kind of up in the north, along Grizzly Peak Road there, North Oakland Sports Center there, just kind of south of the 24, moving along some parcels again along kind of Skyline Road there, Shepherd Canyon Park and that Shepherd Canyon area into Montclair a little bit. There's a parcel here on 13 here, Montclair Park. A few parcels up here around Broadway Terrace and Temescal kind of reservoir up in that area. Diamond Canyon Park throughout Saucil Creek corridor down there. Joaquin Miller Park, well, just here, just outside the building, a large area. And then kind of continuing south there along Skyline Boulevard, Leona Heights, there along Campus Drive towards Merritt College. Then all the way down here towards Miller Park, the zoo, Lake Chabot Golf Course, and 2 parcels along the Skyline. Most of the kind of plan area here is in this kind of border between the ridge line along Skyline Road and say highways 13 and 580, but there are some parcels that are on the other side of 13 and 580, notably King Estates Park, which is a park in kind of more of an urban area, has a little bit different fire risk than some of the hills areas, and then Diamond Canyon also is on the other side of Highway 13. So that's the plan area. And this is about 1,400 acres of city-owned parcels. And the plan also includes over 300 miles of roadways. And those are shown, some of those here. Let's see. Yeah, it adds up to about 300 miles of roadway. Of the 300 miles of roadway, about 30 miles in any given year are kind of active or high priority maintenance targets that the city will target maintenance on. So this is also kind of a portion of the project area. Let me turn it over to Scott to talk about the plan outline.
All right, thanks, Ken. So at this stage in the process, we've put together a plan outline. I'm just going to work through each section here and briefly discuss what we would envision for that section of the plan to cover. So obviously an introduction would cover the purpose, goals, and objectives of the plan. The plan area description would focus on the fire environment in the plan area, and that's primarily terrain, topography, fuels, weather, as well as fire history, fire hazard, and the wildland-urban interface, wildland-urban intermix condition that's present in the plan area. The third section would cover a wildfire hazard assessment. I'll talk about a little bit more about that in the next slide and what tools we're using for that. Codes and standards would summarize the relevant local and state codes and regulations that would be applied to any type of vegetation management that would occur in the plan area. Those might be tree preservation ordinances, stream setback ordinances, those type of things. Management plans and programs, again, any management plans that have been developed for properties in the plan area that may affect the vegetation management plan itself. Public engagement would be a summary of the process we're involved in here, stakeholder outreach and the public meetings that will be forthcoming. Plan area resources, that would be primarily biological resources, community resources such as historic buildings or communications facilities, those type of things, as well as other natural resources, waterways, streams, those type of things. Vegetation management techniques, this section would focus on identifying and describing the different types of approaches that can be implemented. We saw earlier some survey results about biological, mechanical, chemical, and manual techniques, so that's what would be covered there. Vegetation management areas and standards, That would outline measurable standards for achieving vegetation management in certain areas. And so it would define those by likely vegetation, dominant vegetation type, as well as area. There's some influences there. Practices to avoid, minimize impacts, maybe also known as best management practices. What type of approaches and technique can be implemented to minimize impacts to sensitive wildlife species, for example, or slope stability. And then the final section would be plan implementation. That would outline the mechanics of how the plan is actually implemented, roles and responsibilities, the planning process that the city would move forward with each year, as well as and monitoring, reporting, kind of an adaptive management approach there. The appendices, fairly self-explanatory with the glossary of terms. If there's any terminology used in the plan that might need a broader definition. The biological resources report, which would be, I think Ken will summarize a little bit here on the heels of some of the field work that's been completed. The fire behavior hazard assessment analysis, as well as any parcel data tables that are generated in the mapping and GIS effort that we're working on. And then potentially a broader description of treatment recommendations. So in respect to the hazard assessment methodology, we're coming at it from several different angles. We've done a lot of field assessment work and mapping to look at vegetation conditions in the plan area, terrain, the layout of the city-owned parcels and roadways as it covers the plan area. Doing a lot of geographic information systems or GIS mapping and analysis work. Again, we're looking at similar things. We're looking at terrain, vegetation distribution. We're looking at land ownership. We're looking at the proximity of structures to plan area parcels. And then we'll, in the process of working on developing some fire behavior modeling for a portion of the plan area to look at where we may have extreme fire behavior potential, which may need to be mitigated. And then finally research, and that's communicating with the Oakland Fire Department and trying to better understand their current practices, as well as other nuances, if you will, to the plan area. For example, known ignition locations that maybe would not be represented in a mapping environment. So with that, I'll turn it back to Ken. We'll talk a little bit about some of the field work, and I'll jump back in as well.
Great, thank you. So